First question for Wayne Best. What trends are we going to see in consumer spending, and as business leaders, how can we prepare for them?
Well, the trends in consumer spending, I think it really goes back to the demographics of the population itself. So, if we look at demand curves about when people buy things, baby boomers are now moving into their stage of life that they're starting to look at things such as experiences and travel and those types of things, and much less the buying of goods. Whereas the younger generation, the millennials, are just now coming into their own. They're going to start forming households. They're going to start moving into apartments, of course, as well as buying homes and all the things that are necessary for that. We often think that consumers are going to behave very differently in this millennial generation, now going to be the largest generation, even larger than the baby boom generation. We often think that they're going to behave very differently, but that's just not the case. The data continues to see the changes and the similarities about how they spend and where they spend, but just shifted a little bit later in life. And that probably has a lot to do with the student loans and other paybacks that they have. But there is that migration in terms of the types of things and where they focus their energies and their spending overall. As businesses, we have to be mindful of the Internet of Things, the fact that how consumers shop today is very different than what they shopped before. A lot of use of online space. Buying an automobile is an entirely different proposition today than it was even 10 years ago. And so businesses have to be thinking about the various generational shifts, and the millennials now starting to come into their own in terms of the size and the population size, as well as their impact. And shifting marketing programs and other things to reflect the needs of that particular generation as they continue to spend.
Thank you. Next question for John Sylvia. Simply, Greece, how could it affect us here in the Bay Area?
I think the first impact, of course, is the dollar-euro. So anybody here trying to sell products into the euro area probably has to realize that the price and competitiveness is going to be more significant. Second, I think Greece overall does keep down the long-term interest rates a little bit more than otherwise. And then finally, I think, again, the sense of confidence with respect to long-term treaties and agreements. To what extent, looking at certain players, do they actually conform to what the treaty is saying over time? Oftentimes, I think in economics and in business, one of the biggest challenges we all have is that we tend to overlook things that aren't fitting into the scheme. There's a tendency, what we call the normalization of deviance. You have deviant behavior that continues over time, generally being ignored. And I think for most business people, that is the biggest challenge, is to recognize at what point that the deviance really does make a difference. For those of you that are interested, you can always read the story about the Challenger and the explosion on the Challenger, and that was a great example of just organizations, companies, people that just continue to be slightly different than everyone else. We continue to have an excuse for their bad behavior, and eventually at one point in time it blows up.
Thank you. Rick, you mentioned earlier in your slides the discussion of the Innovation Alliance in San Francisco. How would that benefit the city?
Well, I think that benefits the city, benefits all of us, because we're all in this together. We have a golden opportunity in that we have a reputation here. The world looks here to us in terms of innovation and obviously historically technological innovation. Through the Alliance, we can build the skill sets here in San Francisco that again project out to the rest of the world to say, this is still the place you look. You will always look here for the technological innovation and the financial support that goes along with that innovation. But now you can also look here for the data skills and analytics. Now, if one or two companies in this room do that, that's not going to impress on a global scale. But when we come together as a community through the Alliance and with the help of the Chamber, then we show the world, as we have done in technology, that this whole environment, this ecosystem of San Francisco and the Bay Area is united around this, and therefore this is the place to look.
Next question is for Kim. The mayor announced his traffic congestion plan recently. You described traffic solutions elsewhere. What are other technologies or areas that the city should look at?
Well, as we mentioned just in the Warriors, take a look at the connected rail application that's predominant in Europe because of their rail and infrastructure, but you have it here as well. So when you think about connected rail, connected bus, those are the different applications coming together. Think about connected lighting. Those are the applications that are changing the way the city operates and how they're providing services and managing when we're all forced to do less. We're forced to do more, actually, with less. So those are some of the applications that we see across the globe, and there's some great case studies available that could actually articulate how a city could take this digitization of the services and the requirements, the utilities that are required by our citizens, and actually move it forward. So I would say right now, in recent and what's timely with the mayor's announcement, it is about connected rail, parking, lighting, and buses.
Great, thank you. Jay, how do you work within the framework of the government to improve it? What are your metrics?
It's a good question. Hard question for the morning. So we often form partnerships internally. It's all about collaboration. We see ourselves, my office of civic innovation, very much a startup within government, and as a bridge with the broader community, bringing in new ideas, bringing in those methodologies and those capacities into government, and building those partnership models and frameworks. And so really, we focus a lot on building trust and building those relationships internally. Especially as a small team, we can't help everybody. The other thing that we're looking to do is actually to empower our staff to be more innovative. So looking at the private sector, Fortune 500 companies that have driven sort of innovation agendas within their organization, driving cultural evolution, driving leadership, how do we empower the 25,000 plus employees in our city government to be more effective and responsive to sort of the concerns of their constituents? In terms of metrics, we like to sort of see the impact that we're making. So the example at SFO, we're sort of a force multiplier. We try to bring in companies and other people who have talent and resources and bring that to bear in government. So it's really about the impact that we're making.
Great, thank you. John, what changes do we need to increase productivity outside the tech sector, or is technology the solution to increasing U.S. productivity?
Well, the number one problem about productivity, as many of you imagine, is that the U.S. economy has changed pretty dramatically over the last 50 years. It's become less manufacturing and more services. It's very difficult to measure productivity in services. But I think overall, the most important thing is the processing of information. I think Rick said something that maybe perhaps a lot of you may not have put a high regard to, but I do. He mentioned relevant data. Many of us, when we were growing up, we went to a library, and the librarian would claim that, well, we have 25,000 volumes in our library. Wonderful. I don't care about 24,950 of them. All I care is about 50. I need the relevant information. It's one of the big challenges for big data. I don't give a damn if you have 20 million bytes of information. All I care about is 1,000 of them. And the biggest challenge many of us have is getting those screens, figuring out who's doing the screen, what are the biases of the person picking out the screen, and then finally what kind of information I get at the end. And I think if you want to improve productivity, you need to figure out, okay, how am I processing the information? And actually, how am I going to use it? How many times, many of you have been here 10, 15, 20 years, you know the 20 most prone traffic jam areas in this city. And it's the same 20 areas it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. What are you going to do about it? Yes, I have the information. I'm just not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to let it sit, okay? I mean, again, one of the amazing frustrations, all right, is that we have this information. One of the most amazing cases for me is like, okay, this employee is watching porn all day on his computer. And you can't fire him? No, we can't fire him. Great, you have all this information, you know what everybody's looking at, and yet you can't do anything about it. So I think if you really want productivity, you need to process information. You're going to have to know what kind of information you're processing. And then once you get something, actually use it. I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
I really wish John would stop monitoring my computer usage. But thanks, John. I'm going to select Wayne. This question actually could be for any of you, so I'd love to hear anybody add to this response. But all this data and information we have, and talking about consumer spending, and we're collecting all this information, how safe is that information from the bad people or the bigger issues out there today, imposter fraud? What should we be thinking about with regard to that?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the ethics of the companies that are collecting this information and how it's going to be used and what their charter is and how they're planning on and providing this information for what end use. As more and more things become connected, whether it's the location of individuals via their cell phones, where they're spending, et cetera, these are the things that will continue to challenge many companies and obviously governments as they decide to, what is the true benefit of this data, what is the end use of it, how can it be used, and how could it really improve life. So not unlike what we have in terms of decisions about, who you are going through the airport or whatever else, there are certain, given rights and certain pieces of information that have to be managed and used appropriately. And that's a challenge as well as an opportunity for most companies. Others to add to this?
I'll add a bit if I may, and I'll link it back to what John was saying as well. This is why educating everybody, in particular the leadership cadre, this is not just about having a small bunch of really smart data scientists. You need those too. But this question speaks to us as leaders. We've always had data. Companies have always had data. And we've always, therefore, as leaders, had the responsibility for security and privacy and using information ethically. And so we have to educate today's leaders about what this new world of big data is all about, so that they, again, can act responsibly and inform their customers effectively. And I'll go back to John's impassioned plea. It is about relevant information. And again, understanding what data is actually useful. And what I used, the phrase I used on my slides, and I always talk about, is what you need as actionable insights. If you're not going to take action, what was the point? It just wasted time and money. But it's the leadership in this room and the rest of your leadership in your companies that are responsible for this issue of security and privacy and ethics. And that's a business decision, not a technological one.
Great. Last question. John, while we're all concerned citizens of this world and it's a global economy, really all we care about is San Francisco. So are we in a bubble again? Is this a large bubble, small bubble? Is it sustainable? You showed the hockey stick with Oakland and other things that are going on in this area.
From an economics point of view, no, we're not in a bubble, but I think it's important to understand what some of the drivers are. And there's always a question about housing affordability. And for me, housing affordability is the result. And it's the result of the innovation, the job gains, the wage and income gains, the gains in the stock market. Those are the signals that I would look for if there's going to be a change. And for me, the biggest question I have right now is always, what are you discounting and what do you get? And I think the challenge for us as economists right now is a lot of people expected 8 to 10% growth in China. We're getting something like 5 to 6. If you built your business based upon 8% growth and you get 6, you have a problem. And I think it's not so much a bubble, but again, those disappointing surprises that come along that are much more of the challenge right now. But no, I don't think San Francisco, the metropolitan area, is really in a bubble, nor do I feel the U.S. economy is in a bubble. there's just a lot of good fundamentals going on, again, as Wayne had pointed out, with the American consumer.
Please help me thank our guest speakers for today. One of the greatest fears about putting on one of these events is going beyond our time. And the good news is we have a gift of time for you, and that is we ended a tad early. So take the opportunity to engage with each other, conversations with our speakers, and our panelists. It would be enlightening for you to spend a little bit of time with them. I want to acknowledge something that Rick Hutley mentioned and several others, and that is the concept of the Innovation Alliance. What it's about, the Chamber's greatest strength is the ability to convene people of like interest, to also get people of differing viewpoints. And so the intent, of course, is to how can we maintain and grow San Francisco's innovation edge. In working with Jay and his colleagues at the city, you know, it's about government, education, and business working together to continue to make San Francisco the thriving place that it is. So we invite you to participate and fill out the card. I also want to acknowledge a guest today, one of our sponsors, but in particular, I understand that Jim Foley, president of the Bay Area of Wells Fargo, is here. I want to acknowledge him in the audience and thank him and his team at Wells Fargo, including Peter and others, for their support. Welcome, Jim. Also want to thank our sponsors, again, Wells Fargo for 6 years, and the sponsors up on the PowerPoint here. And in conclusion, I want to mention a couple quick commercials, of course. That we're accepting applications for our annual EBBY Awards, which is the awards that we have that's in November of this year. Excellence in Business Awards that we've been doing for over 24 years. Nominations are available for that. The sponsors are shown here up on the screen. But I also want to mention a very exciting event in February. As you know, San Francisco and the Valley here are host for the Pro Football Super Bowl. And this year in particular, the Chamber is co-hosting with the Hall of Fame a very exciting event honoring John Madden. You can hear more about it through Craig and others out at the outside. It's going to be a great event, the 50th year of the Super Bowl, and the Chamber is co-sponsoring this luncheon with the Hall of Fame. And lastly, we have a message from Stephen Curry. We will give you shortly on the screen. October 6th, save the date, Intercontinental Hotel for the beginning of the defending of the Warriors title. You know, 40 years ago we won the championship, and it's been 40 years. Let's not make it another 40. And so you'll see that on your way out. But do spend some time connecting with each other, and I want to thank our speakers again, and particularly want to thank Mary Boyle, Camille Blasick, and others from the staff, Joey, for putting this thing on. Julia Morgan Ballroom is quite a fabulous facility. We may need a larger one next year. Thanks for being here, and have a good day.
Hey, this is Stephen Curry from the Golden State Warriors. And join me for the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce Warriors Tip-Off Luncheon.
It brings a lot of joy, it brings a lot of excitement. It's a great promotion for the city.
The Chamber of Commerce has played a huge role in the arena project, partnering with the Warriors. So it's very exciting as we look ahead to playing in front of great fans. It's going to be a lot of fun.
You get to see all the players in one sitting. You get to hear about the business of basketball. You get from players about what it's like to play with each other and to enjoy the game of basketball. You can't miss it.
San Francisco Chamber of Commerce.